Americans left their jobs at a record high rate in August, with around 4.3 million Americans quitting, according to the Labor Department. This trend has fewer Americans working at a time when Democrats in Congress want to expand social programs in a way that could potentially mean that even more Americans might leave work. Andrew Yang, author of the new book Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy, ran for president and for New York City mayor as a Democrat, but is now launching his own party, and he joins me now for his Untold Story. Hi, Andrew. It's great to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Martha.
You know, you touch on so many important subjects, and I think a lot of people on all sides of the political spectrum are really concerned about the country right now. You recently became an independent.
Yes.
You left the Democrat Party. Tell me about that decision.
I'd been a Democrat for 26 years, Martha, and I have to say, changing my registration to independent felt still somewhat emotional and profound, where I first, let me say, I've really enjoyed my 2 weeks as an independent. It's been a blast.
Very liberating.
Yes, but it's wild because you see people doing things and taking actions, and I genuinely think I see them in a different light now than I did when I was a registered Democrat. And I know a lot of the folks who are in government who are trying to pass certain policies right now.
You know, I remember following you a bit on the campaign trail, and your Yang Gang folks were always, I just found them to be super sincere and genuinely fired up and enthusiastic about you and very happy, you know, just happy to be sort of following someone who is new and fresh and different. It did not translate into wins for you in those two big races, but it clearly put your thinking on the map and in front of a lot of Americans. So now you've written this book, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. Where do you hope to tell me basically? So let's start first with, you know, what you hope to achieve with this book. What message do you want to get across to people?
Martha, I came off the presidential trail having gone through this journey that not many Americans get to experience. And so I wanted to try and catalog and document what had happened to me on the trail. Love the people that supported me. Imagine being an anonymous American who runs for president and then showing up to rallies of thousands and people chanting your name and the rest of it. So I felt this obligation to document the journey, but also talk about what the future holds and what it could or should hold. And right now, I think you opened up this program saying that Americans feel very stuck right now, like that there's a lot of dismay about the state of affairs, and it's not going to get any better. That was really the finding that I unearthed while I was writing my book, where right now our system is dysfunctional. It's one reason why we're getting increasingly angry and frustrated. And so my book poses a new path forward that I think could help unlock us from this dysfunction. And the dysfunction is born of a duopoly where these two parties will clash, and neither will be able to achieve its goals for any extended period of time because of this you lose, I lose dynamic that the parties are playing, where the pendulum's going to swing back and forth. And it's just going to make us more and more inflamed over time.
So you dedicated the book to the people who supported you in both of those races, and you said we're only getting started. How do you find the momentum? And some of your ideas have to do with ranked choice voting and fact-based decision making, and ideas that I think make a lot of sense to a lot of people. But it is very difficult to buck against the trend of these two parties, which I think you accurately portray as basically being like a zero-sum game in every single moment, where everything becomes talking points and everything is about tearing the other side down. So is there a path for an independent and for a new party?
Well, we'd better hope so, Martha. But one thing I want to do is I want to go back to first principles, where if you look at the Constitution, there's zero mention of any political parties. George Washington warned against them. John Adams feared two great parties clashing forever and ever. And so the duopoly we're in the midst of right now really was not the founders' design at all. And at this point, 62% of Americans want there to be an alternative. So that's the backdrop. Like, there's a lot of desire. Independents outnumber Republicans or Democrats in terms of their self-identification. So as an entrepreneur, if I showed up to a marketplace and there were two companies and 62% of people wanted an alternative, then you try and create an alternative as quickly as possible. But the mechanics of the duopoly make it very, very difficult for any third party to emerge. And you've seen that over and over again. So that's sort of the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Then the question is, which wins? But I will say that the 62% of people that want a third party alternative is higher than it's ever been recorded.
When you look at the system right now, and you had proposed a universal basic income, $1,000 a month. And I know there are a lot of factors of why you support that, but one of the factors is the sort of automation trend in the United States that was heading towards putting a lot of people out of jobs. I'm fascinated by something that has happened during COVID and over the past year and a half, close to 2 years, which is that we see people leaving the workplace. So when we look at the unemployment numbers, on some scales, they seem to be improving. But when you look at the labor force participation, it's dropping. And that's voluntary. That isn't necessarily driven by automation. That is voluntary. And I read a really interesting quote from a Wall Street Journal piece this morning, which talked about the labor force participation number as from the Great Society on 1965 for the lowest quintile of American workers, right? The lowest end of the income bracket went from 70% to 35% over the course of those years. So as you've expanded social programs dramatically, Great Society onward, and now we're talking about a $3.5 trillion package, which would send that even higher, we see people leaving the workforce. And so I see a similarity in the programs that we've rolled out in the past year and a half of, extending unemployment and offering more benefits to American workers that is continuing that trend of getting them to drop out of the workforce. You look at Italy, you look at France, they have 50% roughly out of the workforce completely and being covered by the government. Is that a dangerous trend to you?
I think that people going to jobs is vital, not just for them to be able to make a living, but for structure, purpose, fulfillment, connectivity. There are a lot of reasons why we should be very, very concerned about labor force participation rate going lower. And really, to me, the trillion-dollar question is, how do you make it go back up? Now, one reason why I'm for universal basic income is I think attaching money or cash relief to not working is a mistake. I talk to 25-year-olds, 27-year-olds. I mean, this is not just necessarily for young people, but they say to me, look, I'm getting 3/4 of what I was going to make working for not working, so I'm not going to look for a job until this relief runs out. And that's just a bad incentive. Like if they were getting a certain amount of money and if they went back to work, they got to keep it, then they might be looking much more seriously. But right now we're saying, look, if you actually find a job, then you don't get this money. And that's a messed up incentive. One reason why I like the idea of getting money into people's hands is that you could see that money go back into locally owned small businesses that are in position to create jobs where people live and work. But I 100% agree with you that a plummeting labor force participation rate is a disaster for our country on multiple levels. And the level I think of first and foremost really is just that social fabric, where if people aren't going to work every day, you see substance abuse rates rise, depression, anxiety, and other social ills.
Do you worry that COVID, I remember when it first began, people saying this is going to change the country forever. And I thought, no, it isn't. It's going to be around for a while and everyone's going to get back to their lives as soon as they can. But it has. It has changed the way people look at work. You talk about the priests of decline in your book and, politicians sort of having that mantle. I think that, the change in the workforce and people working from home and maybe going to the office a couple of days a week, I see that as a priest of decline for the country. I think there's a lot that's gained by people being in the office, being together, being in the workforce. And it amazes me how quickly the country and the workforce detached from this idea that getting up in the morning and going to your job is a good thing. It seems to me that most people feel that not having to do that is a good thing, is a better thing than going to the workplace. And I'm curious what you think about that.
I agree with you that there's a certain value to us being in the same place, and that's not just theoretical. Like that's actually been borne out, that teams are more innovative, more creative, more collaborative if we're physically in the same place. So there is unfortunately a lot of resistance among workers, and I understand it. I mean, I have a family, so I understand it, where you see these tech companies they ask people, hey, like, do you want to come back to the office? Do you want to come back to the office some of the time? Do you want to come back to the office not at all? And a lot of people prefer the remote work lifestyle.